The world faces some pretty large issues in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. In Europe, estimated to be about 24% of all emissions come from land transport, and of those maybe half of that's from the car. The amount of energy that we are all responsible for using is huge compared to what we can currently generate from renewable sources.
REPUTE stands for Renewable Energy Public Transport Enterprise.
REPUTE is an 18-month project funded through the Atlantic area, and we're looking to develop the imaginative use of renewable energy into public transport.
What it does is it tries to look at how to improve mobility for people in the Atlantic area by using renewable technologies and by using all sorts of technologies to promote energy efficiency.
And of course, at the end of the day, we all aim to lower CO2 emissions and live on a greener world.
The problem really in the Atlantic area, the difficulty in the Atlantic area is there's much smaller population, so it's not really so cost effective or practical for people to use public transport, and it's not really that practical for a lot of businesses to provide public transport in rural areas and areas that have less population.
The problem in rural areas is that it's more difficult to find a public bus, for example, that goes every 10 minutes or half an hour, like in a city that you have every 5 minutes or things like that.
Because let's face it, they are at a disadvantage. They only have 4 buses a day, or maybe 1 train a day, as opposed to the bigger cities which have got lots of multimodal forms of transport.
So a project such as this really is to focus on how, obviously people still need to move around, and if you're in isolated areas, obviously you need to have a car.
So how can we learn from those schemes in the big cities, take the advantages of those and try and transfer them to the more remote and sparsely populated regions of Atlantic area?
So this project, the personal travel planning and the shared car ideas are ways of exploring, well, how do we minimise the need for people to use their cars?
So it's also about trying to maybe create something in those remote regions which needn't necessarily have come from the more populated regions. It could be something that is unique to those regions and maybe only applies to those regions. So we're looking at that as well. What are the options there, and what can we learn from other schemes that are being carried out around the world? We're doing 2 pilots in REPUTE. One is in Scotland and one is in Portugal. So what we've come up with is a plan to install renewable energy powered signs that will have up-to-date information in remote locations. Secondly, personal travel planning. What we're planning to do there is to help the people in those remote regions to come up with a plan as to how they can get maximum benefit from public transport and from more greener forms of fuel. In Portugal, we're working with a manufacturer of PV panels and a manufacturer of small electric vehicles that seat 1 person or 2 persons. Now they can think about taking the bus, jumping into the little electric car, free of charge, driving to their appointment and coming back again.
We promote intermodality, but also that electric vehicles can be an alternative to fuel vehicles, which is what nowadays we all use. The electric vehicles are here. They're here to stay, whether it's next year or in the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
One of the objectives of REPUTE is to develop a guide, and the guide is aimed at the public transport operators and the policymakers.
So there's a number of energy technologies which are interesting, so different to diesel and petrol. We're looking at gases, we're looking at hydroelectricity to go into the grid, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind of course, but there's no doubt that second generation biofuels generating energy from waste, let's say agricultural waste, food waste, is a fantastic resource. There's just so much of it, and we can generate electricity from it directly, or we can generate gases like methane, which we could burn directly in an engine.
Basically the guide gathers information from all the partners and gathers information from all of Europe and gathers information from the global perspective and just puts that together in looking at the best practice solutions for energy efficiency in public transport.
Experiences derived from European projects, so projects over maybe the last 10 years where we think it's directly relevant.
And information sharing across Europe is hugely important from cultural reasons and for technological solutions.
It's nice because you learn good practice for other people, and also because you see that we are not very different.
Anything basically that any public transport operator is doing in the area of public transport that we can get into that guide, then it'll become the go-to guide basically.
A document which will provide the go-to place for people, policy makers, transport planners, local authorities. Behaviour shift for transport, of course, is kind of crucial and yet very, very difficult.
I think young kids are already starting to see more to the environment than we did in our age. And now it's hard to make some people to see the problems with climate change and all this.
So I think what we can do is try to change behaviour in the younger generation. It'd be rather more difficult for the older generation who have been used to cars and comfort, because cost may not be the issue. So we can try to have financial incentives, but actually cost is not often the main driver for behaviour change, but other advantages or disadvantages are what makes the difference.
We're going to have a series of final conferences across each of the regions, and we're going to invite the policy makers, the strategy makers, the people in public policy, and we're going to make an overwhelming convincing case that if they take a look at the suggestions that we've got, the recommendations, then perhaps it might be a good idea if they give some thought to them. The final conference is totally unique to my knowledge and to others who have worked in European projects before. It has not been done. So it's unique because it's a conference tour, and so it's a conference on the move. What we're going to do instead is we're going to get on a bus. We're going to start in Glasgow, and over a 2-week period we'll come across to Northern Ireland, we'll go down into Ireland, we'll go across to France, down into Spain, into Portugal, and we'll finish up there, and we'll do it all over a 2-week period, and we'll all get to know each other very well indeed.